What happens when law, business, and life collide? Each week on Lead Counsel, your host Tom Tona will take a deep dive into topics related to the law, the business of law, and life. There will be insightful discussions with industry insiders, experts, and thought leaders making significant contributions and meaningful differences in their fields of expertise. Tom is the founder and managing attorney at TonaLaw. He has been a practicing attorney since 1994 and the leader of TonaLaw since it opened in 2001. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with free information on law and the business of law, and to give you actionable tools related to each of these areas. Now, here's Tom.
Hey, welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. Your host, Tom Tona. Before we jump into today's topic, I just want to take a minute to thank the sponsors of the podcast. This episode is sponsored by TonaLaw. They're not just another law firm. They're defining what it means to fight for their clients. We get a lot of attorney referrals from across the country. We pay fee participation in all jurisdictions where it's permitted. We focus on integrity, innovation, and relentless advocacy. TonaLaw is proving that the business of law can scale without losing its heart. If you want to see how a modern firm is built for impact and happy client referrals, check out TonaLaw.com. Mention again the Lead Counsel Podcast, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. This episode is also brought to you by Meet Gabby, the voice AI built for law firms. Gabby answers your phones 24/7, qualifies leads, and books consultations so you never miss another client. Imagine cutting intake time in half or giving every caller a 5-star experience. That's the power of Meet Gabby. Learn more at meetgabby.com. Mention the Lead Counsel Podcast. You can also hit me up, and I'm glad to make an introduction to the owner. I'm going to start the podcast a little differently before I introduce today's guest. There's a quote from a book. The quote is, "We carry an enormous history around inside of us. We forget chapters. We remember chapters. Mostly we forget chapters. That's why it makes so little sense sometimes. All memories aid the premise that the past is always there." And that was written by a gentleman named Alan S. Nessel. Today's guest is Steve Eichenblatt, and Steve wrote the book, Pretend They're Dead. And that quote is from his father, Alan S. Nessel. Steve, welcome to the show. It's an unorthodox way for me to start. I was so taken back by so many things in your book that I literally couldn't put it down.
Yeah, man, thanks. And you're the first person. I've been on a bunch of podcasts that actually quoted that particular quote from Alan Nessel, because he was a really great writer, and he is as messed up as his brain sort of was. He had some brilliant things to say.
Yeah, I left a review on Amazon after I read it, and I loved the book. So the review I left was just short and sweet, but it was 5 stars, obviously. But the book to me was so complex and layered in human emotion and a story of resilience, but the complexities, and I mean complexities in a very good way, because I think it captures what I love about life and people. Right? You did a masterful job of capturing the human condition on so many deep levels. And I was just literally blown away. I was telling a mutual friend of ours, I get books sent to me all the time. I talk about them if I read them or whatever. I picked yours up. I just so happen to have it referred to me by a guy named Chris Early. You know Chris, right?
Yes.
So Chris published his own book, and I read Chris's book. And then he said, you got to read Steve's book. So I read it. I just couldn't put it down. I literally just finished it this morning because I had been reading in the middle of the night and all these different odd hours to finish the book. I was blown away. It was really amazing. And then I heard Bill Umansky talking to you, and I was like, I got to get him on a podcast. Bill's a friend of mine, and he reached out to you. So I really appreciate you being here. And, even though I talk a lot about business and the business of law and that stuff, to me, this book was very impactful. We share a lot of common things. You talk about not only what was lost, but things that were never said. And then you bring everything back full circle. So tell me, for the people that don't know you or haven't read the book yet, Pretend They Are Dead is your memoir of your relationship with your father, your stepfather, your family, going through your childhood, etc. So I would start with why now and why this book for you? What did it mean for you to write this?
I think, of course, writing the book helped me go through this journey, because I went through so much trauma. I didn't even realize I was going through the trauma in a lot of ways, because when you're dealt a certain set of cards, family, you don't realize that, hey, my family is a lot more screwed up than a lot of the other families. And I had some troubles in relationships as I got older. I flunked out of school. I was very defiant. If somebody told me to do something, I clearly would do the opposite. And it just, and I was really good at that. I don't like taking orders. Because I was brought up in a house where I was screamed at, and there's a voice in my head all the time, somebody telling me, you're a loser, you're not going anywhere. I have told people on other podcasts, listen, back in our era, it was pretty common for fathers to use a belt on their kids. I think everybody in my neighborhood, and I grew up in New Jersey, Italian, Irish neighborhood, the dads were scary and use the belt. But that's not the pain that sticks with me. The pain that sticks with me is the names that I was called constantly, the berated, in a house with 7 kids and a guy that was just a tough person. It's the name calling and telling me you'll never be anything. You're a loser. Those are exact words. So that kind of motivated me in a lot of ways to show him and also to get rid of that voice by going through therapy. I'm a guy that I know you can appreciate this because I know you did martial arts, and I did martial arts, but I got in a fight with my instructor because I didn't call him I didn't like the little rules. And so I wasn't good at following them. And so they kind of pulled me aside and said, listen, we have a hierarchy here, and maybe I wasn't paying attention, but so I stopped the martial arts. My law partner jokes about it. But so anyway, there's just a lot of things that came together that motivated me to write this, plus going through a couple divorces. And I like to write. And as a lawyer, you got to write within a certain way. And I wanted to write what was ever in my brain, just let it go out from my brain onto the paper without thinking about what I was saying.
So it's interesting because you said, you're older than me. I'm 57. I don't know how old you are, but I was jotting down notes as I was reading the book. And what I found really interesting, I have always had this hypothesis, massive societal shifts in the late 60s, early 70s that coincided with the time periods you write about. And I always attributed it to, and again, it's all anecdotal, to oral contraception, right? Women's liberation around the same time, and the sexual revolution, right? So, but there's a lot of family trauma that came from those things. Like when you mentioned Valium, there's a reason why, I forget the song, Mother's Little Helper by the Rolling Stones, right? It's about Valium, right? So there's a lot of shared experience from that era and a lot of trauma, familial trauma, because I don't think any of our parents, it was intentional. I think that it was a very tumultuous time for them. And I say we because I got a lot of shared stuff that you shared. I have as well, that we were the shrapnel, right? We were the bystanders that got hit with the shrapnel, right?
Definitely. So, collateral damage.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting about what you said is a lot of high achievers that we know have that internal dialogue, right? They have that feeling of not being good enough. And it is shared among a lot of us that you look from the outside, everybody looks hyper successful. You go, why would you ever be unhappy? Your whole life is charming, right? But they don't know the inner workings.
That's right. I think that's helped me too as a personal injury lawyer. I do just what you do because I have clients come in and they think just because you're a lawyer, successful lawyer, I've got a nice building, I have nice practice, that you haven't been through the junk. You haven't been through the and I'm really good because of what I've been through in a lot of different phases of my life at identifying with just about everybody because I've been there. I've been in, was never afraid to use my hands, wasn't afraid of hard work, wasn't afraid of getting in trouble sometimes. You're able to identify with a lot of different people when you kind of have gone through what we went through.
Absolutely. Another thing we have in common, I'm adopted as well, right? Now, I didn't have the same set of facts, but there's some trauma that was behind that as well, right? So interestingly enough, though, a lot of it also comes from the time frame, right? So back then, adoption was like, oh, you saved this poor child. We both have different interactions as far as what those adoptions meant. And you wrote about yours in detail, right? And again, it shed a lot of light on the iterations of these different social paradigms, right? You think about adoption. It's about, what's best for the child, it's supposed to be, right? But you have the people that are involved, and people are not perfect. They're all broken in some way or another. And so you end up with shrapnel from the adoption. You end up with shrapnel from your biological family. And yeah, you end up with then divorce you carry forward. Some people it's substance abuse, some people it's all of it, right? It becomes a conglomerate. So I think that, you took me on a journey with this book. I was literally emotionally exhausted after the last page, because you brought it full circle in a really great way. So give people an overview without spoiling the way you take them through it. The early childhood years, right? You wrote about them in such detail and you had all these assumptions. So describe the childhood home that you were in and what it meant to be told you were going to be adopted.
Sure, I'll do my best. So my biological father was a veterinarian. I grew up in Wayne, New Jersey, and my mom divorced, and he he disappeared. Took us out one day. There was three of us. I had a twin sister and brother. We were not told that he was leaving. He took us out, one day, and there'd been some trouble in the house between him and my mother as far as drop-offs and pickups, and they put us in the middle and they play that game. And one day he dropped us off and he never came back, ever. That was it. He was done. And we lived in the same town. He had an office in my town. I think he lived within 2 or 3 miles of where I lived, and I never saw him because he walked away from us. And basically later I learned that he had gone to a psychiatrist who said, just pretend they're dead. That's what you need to do. So that's how he went. And in the meantime, my mother married a man who turned out to be a really difficult, stepfather, adopted father from hell. We didn't know that she was getting married. We wound up coming home one weekend from a weekend with my grandparents, and a new family has moved into our house. These are your new brothers and sisters. These are the rules. So you're thrown into this. And I was just a kid, man. I was like 6, 7 years old. So you just kind of take what comes. And I was a quiet kid. And it's like all of a sudden, okay, here's your brothers and sisters. And now we have new rules in your house. And, a very difficult, not allowed to sit on the furniture my entire childhood, had to walk through the back door, were treated very poorly by a pretty violent guy. And that was a tough way to live. Back then, and I'm sure you remember it, but there's like the Brady Bunch, which shows us two families getting together and everybody's happy, and the Partridge Family and yours, mine, and ours. So on the outside to the whole world, oh, here's these parents have taken in these kids. What an incredible family. But on the inside, it was a minefield. You couldn't be comfortable in the house. There was always hysteria, chaos, violence. It was a chronic thing. So I write about that part, but really about how I learned to confront my trauma and then reconnecting with my biological father in the most horrific way, which is, and I don't mind talking a little bit about this, which is being the only witness to a car crash where a guy went through the windshield and I was the one who saved him, and it was my biological father. And that happened when I was 16, and I got on my bicycle, and I tell this whole story about it, and never told anybody that I was actually there, that I witnessed it, until I was in my 40s. I just got on my bike, went to my buddy's house, probably smoked some dope, listened to Pink Floyd, never told anybody, and it was like, okay, this is another thing that happened crazy thing that happened in my life. It's just another day.
Yeah. And again, I'm not going to give away the way the book twists and turns, because if you read it, you get sucked into all of these different things that unfold, and then the full circle come about, even with regard to the car accident. It was so masterfully done, and it brought tremendous relief by the end of the book. So, and I'll expand on that a little bit. And again, I'm trying to tiptoe around not spoiling really, really interesting.
That's all right.
The way you weave the story. It's yours to tell, and I don't want to ruin that story. But throughout the book, one of the things that I felt, this is going to sound odd, but let me explain why. One of the emotions I felt as I was reading your book was frustration with you, almost wanting to shake you. Has anybody told you that?
No, but I wish somebody had shaken.
Oh, well, let me explain why. At some point, it became very apparent that the same thing you discovered at the very end was love being the core of the relationship, right? And I'm trying to tiptoe around it, not to spoil it.
Sure.
But it was very evident very much earlier on than when you had your epiphany. So I was so relieved at the end when you finally came, like you met me at the place I had arrived that you brought me to much earlier. Does that
Right.
sound like, am I making sense in the way I'm explaining it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially because of what you've been through in your own life. And that's one thing I've noticed I've got a lot of messages from people who can identify with certain parts of it by going through an adoption. Love is let's face it, it's maybe the most overused word and underdone,
And least understood, right?
And now, I've got 5 kids and my daughter, all of her friends, I love you, you're my best friend, and all this stuff. And it's like, what's the threshold for that? And I'll say to my daughter, what's the threshold for you saying that you love somebody? Because it feels like, you meet somebody for 2 minutes and then you love them and they love you back. But
right.
For me, man, I'm still trying to feel it. Still trying to feel inside connection, which eventually I did. But it took a long time. And it's great you made that comment, Tom, about somebody shaking me, because when you're in a house yes, I had a father who abandoned me. Then I had this horrible father who adopted me. And I always was looking, even though I didn't understand it, for for the approval or love of a parent, but I didn't really get it. And I wish somebody had been there, a mentor, somebody like Tom Tona, to shake me up and say, Steve, get your shit together. You need to do A, B, C, D, or you need to understand what's happening around you. Or it wasn't until I got therapy.
Yeah, I think what I meant by that was that far earlier on than you seem to come about in the book. For you, it was the end of the book, right? Where you had the realization of, oh my God, I got it wrong. I was telling myself the wrong story about my dad. And by dad, we're talking about your biological father, Alan, right? And so
yes.
I feel like I knew it much earlier in the book. And maybe that was just the way you spun the story, right? So I found myself wanting to be like, no, dude, he loves you. Don't you see it? Don't you see it? But I guess that's a sign of a great story, right? Like, you told it so well that it brought out all these emotions in me. And I found myself like, I wanted to call you and be like, how did you not see it? Like, it was right there. It was just, I guess, the way it unfolded for you as a young child, right? And again, it goes to the stories you were building and telling in your head.
That's right. And it's also, there were 7 of us. And, some of my siblings were really difficult. I don't talk much about that in the book because I respect them, but there were some really very difficult times in our house, man. And, this book was about me, not necessarily about their journey, because you can live in the same house. I had 7 brothers and sisters, and everybody has their own individual story, and we may have no idea what's going on with them, or they have no idea what's going on with me. We all have our own journey. And so it was really interesting going back and trying to feel some of the things that were going on and looking back as an adult and a guy with my own 5 kids.
Right. It's funny because when you hit a certain point, so I was adopted, my brother was not, he was biological. And I'll talk to him about some of the stuff, I did back, 10 years ago, let's say, about some of the stuff that I remember. And he'll go, that never happened. And I'll be like, of course it happened. I was there. I know it happened. You were only 10 months younger than me. Of course it happened. And not until 10 years later did he say, through his own process, which is his story to tell, he'll call me up and be like, oh my God, I remember. Right. And it starts to unlock for people at different points too. And look, that's both the beauty and the agony of life. Right? Everybody's got whatever's going on between your 2 ears is personal to you. You forget that there's, other people in the house. They all have their different views, as do the people that are the head of the families, the parents. They've got their own, psychological process going on for the same stuff that we do. Right? So I just thought that was what was so cool about the way you layered it. I mean, you really built up the characters excellent. You gave the gotchas once you had the epiphanies that, oh, wait, I kind of got this wrong. And it was just really awesome to take the journey with you. It really was. Now,
I really appreciate it. And I actually got a message from a lawyer in North Carolina who I do not know, but somebody had recommended my book to him, and he's a family lawyer. And he sent a text message to the person who was a lawyer that recommended the book. And he said, this book, I couldn't put it down. And I was in a hearing in a family court this morning. And as I was there, I realized that the book, some of what Steve wrote in the book, helped me during this hearing to get what I wanted for my client, because I felt so strongly. And she shared that with me. And I was like, that's why I wrote the book, to help people, so that people like you, Tom, like even like Bill, like that will realize, wait a second, it's okay to show some vulnerability. It's okay to say, you know what, that really wasn't right. Maybe I should do some examination. Maybe I should try to go back and try to figure out, if you're curious, why what happened, and how do I make myself better so I don't pass that on to my kids. But, having people tell me that helped me, that's, we're plaintiffs lawyers. I mean, yeah, sure. Well, some people say, oh, I want to make millions of dollars, but I want to help people. And I know you do. I know Umansky does. I mean, we do. It's why you fight.
Yeah. And it's super interesting too, that the legacy your father left to you, and we're talking about Alan leaving what he left to you, right? And people are going to have to buy the book and read the book to really understand it. But we'll just suffice to say the box that was left to you, that legacy box, where, think about the gift that turned into, right? Listen, I'll reveal something personal. When my father passed away, he left me a letter. It was sealed. He had written it years before. Same thing, my brother. We both got different letters. It's probably one of the most valuable things he could have left me, right? And it's only a 2-page letter. So for you to have, think about what was in that box and the tremendous, true gift that it was. It was just crazy. Crazy.
Yeah, no, thousands of pages and things in there that of course I only pick out certain events or certain things, but there was thousands of pages. He was a prolific writer. He was pretty insane in a lot of his writing, but clearly a brilliant person. And, one of the things I did, maybe as part of being a lawyer and doing research, is you read about these memoirs and go, there's no way that could be true or that could happen. And as I was going through the process, getting agents, one of the first things I said is, listen, I have all the evidence you could ever want because I have thousands of pages of writing from a person I didn't know who gave me up, was my biological father, who wrote about every freaking day he lived in his life. Every day he wrote. And I also went back and I made it a point to call try to locate some of his former employees, just to talk with them and find out, what their story was with them, make sure everything that I saw. We all have our own, viewpoint, or we see things differently, but I was amazed at how accurate I was. And I have a twin sister, and she did read it, and she said, I was too easy. Steve, she's like, you didn't exaggerate, you were too easy.
On your depiction of Alan.
No, my depiction of what was going on in the house, inside the house.
Gotcha. Yeah, and listen, that is a hard thing to capture to the extent that, when you're in your formative years, as somebody who's been through it, and we know a lot of people have had this type of trauma, in your formative years, the level of stress on teenagers who are not equipped to deal with that level of trauma to begin with, to be able to rebuild it in any way, shape, or form is virtually impossible, right? I grew up in a house where alcohol was an issue, right? It wasn't my father. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the feeling of trying to process, why does somebody act like that when they drink a certain thing, right? You've never been drunk. You've never been exposed to it. So your sister's comment makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because for her, it's probably the most intense thing you'll ever feel is that trauma when you're in your most formative years. It's crazy. It's a crazy intense trauma. They don't prepare you for that. Life doesn't prepare you at, 10 to 15 years old to deal with, acrimonious divorce and then abusive parents or step parents or whatever it is.
Well, I think you can identify this too. You're in that era, right? Men were not raised to be sensitive or cry. I definitely, my father who adopted me, so he's my father, not Alan Nessel, but, Richard, you got to be tough and you got to be tough. If you showed any emotion, that was weakness in his mind. And weakness was forbidden and tears were forbidden. And I know you did the martial arts, he would take us down and fight with us, teach us how to fight. My kids are going to be tough and, they're going to be fighters and they're going to stand up. There's some good, it's good to be able to stand up for yourself and learn that, but the being tough, not being weak, don't cry, all those things kind of numbs you out. And I was, someone was talking to me, I think last week on a show and said, well, after the accident that we talked a little bit about, how did you feel? And she said, were you upset? Did you cry? How did you? And I didn't feel anything. I just it's just another day. Like I said, I got on my bike and went to my buddy's house and acted like I just hadn't seen a guy get splatted in the windshield. I did not allow myself to feel, Because when you don't allow yourself to feel, when you're raised in that environment, so that when later on, when I went to therapy, and the therapy is called bullshit on me, I realized, okay, if I want to help myself, I better start trying to dig.
Allowing yourself to feel, right? It was actually one of the things I highlighted when I was taking notes, which was the feeling of no feeling as a survival mechanism. Like truly, for people that listen to this, and again, it can happen in attorneys' houses, doctors' houses, wealthy, not wealthy, whatever. Dr. Phil, right? Like he's got people that love him, people who hate him. But he always said one thing that I would hear when I was listening to his show, which was, kids need heroes. So, okay, your spouse is acting up, step in and be the hero, right? And I think that the people that have survived generational trauma, and I'll include myself in that, and the stories from the other podcasts that I know you've been on, where the same hosts that we were talking about have all expressed their levels of trauma, right?
Sure.
Putting an end to that generational trauma was kind of our mission. So you can either repeat the past and become the next generation of trauma-inflicting adult with alcohol, drugs, abuse, violence, whatever the vice is, or you can go the opposite way, right? Where you become the parent that you didn't get or you needed, the superhero. And so that was one of the things I took away from you, is you were as determined as me or anybody else that's made the decision of, I know what I went through, but it stops with me, right? And you have 5 kids and you made a conscious daily decision to show up differently. So what did that look like when you started first having kids? What does it look like today? Because you've gone through 2 divorces as well, right? So you've had some tough times.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I was like following the path of, okay, now I'm going to go to law school now that I've got myself together. And then I'm going to get married and marry a Jewish woman because I was Jewish. And then we're going to, white picket fence, and we're all going to live happily ever after. And I had no business doing that because I had no idea how to be in that kind of relationship, like in, an intimate, loving relationship. And because I never got love, and that's not an excuse. So I thought, like, by being the great dad, by being the Little League coach and the soccer coach and taking my kids fishing, that's all I needed to do, as opposed to pay attention to my wife who needed attention. So, I accept my part of, I was never like, I'm not that guy that drank heavily and cheated or did anything. I wasn't that guy, but I was a Little League coach that wasn't paying attention to his wife, that should have been. And we get along, great now. But I think that really, because my biological father his father had left him when he was young. So there was like 2 generations of this. So for me, when I went through the divorce, I was like, I want my kids, their life to be exactly as it was without the divorce. I paid the mortgage off on the house. I gave up my own personal financial security. I am not recommending this at all, but I told my lawyer at the time, I don't care if I'm homeless. I do not want my kids to have to go through what I went through, which was a full-blown custody battle, being in the courthouse, losing my father. I said, it's not their fault. And so that was how I handled it. And then I tried to stay as connected to my kids every day, coaching everything, doing all those things, and I'm not the perfect dad. My kids will be the first ones to tell you that. And my kids are all creatives, and I have great relationships with them. But I don't write this in the book, Tom, but I will share this, and I haven't shared this before, is when I married my second wife, who was actually kind of a celebrity, and I'll tell you off the record who she is or was, or what she still is. She left me and moved to Georgia with my son, just basically took off. And I was getting in my car from Orlando because I could not do what my father did to me. And every other weekend, sometimes more, I would drive the 7 hours to Powder Springs, Georgia from Orlando just to spend 24 hours with my son. I did that for like 3 years. Like I was doing that and then dealing with my other kids because I was not going to allow my kids to get away from me. They needed to be, they were stuck with me no matter what, until I realized you're killing yourself doing this. But, my father lived a mile away and wouldn't drive to see me,
Right.
And so I was driving and my law partners are all like, you're insane. I go, no, man, it's worth it for me to see my son.
Listen, but to me, that's a beautiful story because, especially having just read the book, right? Like you made the conscious decision to do the really, really hard thing to show up differently. right? And what I tell friends, like I have friends that'll go through a divorce, and I had one of my close friends went through a really acrimonious divorce, and I said, you have to rise above it. Let the lawyers do their job, and your North Star always has to be your kids. And forget about what she's doing. Forget about what she's saying about you. There will be a point they will know the truth. They hit that tipping point where they understand. It might be 18, it might be 21.
100%. My daughter didn't talk to me when I say didn't talk, I mean, we didn't have a lot of conversations for like between when she was in her college years or whatever. She just had this, whatever perception was in her mind. And then she moved, when she graduated from college, she started getting counseling, and she called me up and said, Dad, I got this all wrong, and about who you are and what you did and all that. And I apologized, and I realized, you weren't necessarily the problem. And now we have a great relationship. We have a great relationship with my ex. I mean, it's kind of, you realize what's important.
But think about what we just talked about earlier, right? Like the stories that you tell yourself, that's not unique to us. Our kids do it. And, your daughter was doing it. And so that's not any different than the way you wrote the book, where you're telling yourself you had this whole thing in your head, and it was only 50% of the actual, story.
Right.
And
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Right. The blessing that you had was that box, that legacy box, that you got the other 50%. It just, where I felt like, okay, I wanted to shake you in frustration, but then I wanted to hug you at the end too. Like I was like, oh man, if you only knew while he was alive.
First of all, I don't like being hugged because I had too much trauma. So my friends say, you're not a hugger, man. So,
I'll give you a high five,
All right. And then I really do hope that, people will buy the book after listening to this, but going through intense therapy, there's that chapter about that therapist confronted me and said, you have got to be transparent. She almost kicked me out within like the first 2 minutes of being there because, trying to make jokes because I spent a whole day with her. And she said, unless you're willing to be transparent and be honest, I wasn't lying, but, you're always like, you're kind of scuffing things off.
Right.
We're not going to get to the truth of what is inside, what's really happening. And it's amazing when you allow yourself to surrender to that, where it takes you. Like what direction it goes in, because I didn't know how much anger I had. And also writing the book, I realized that was great too. And that's great therapy, journaling, writing. I didn't realize how much anger. I still had a lot of anger about being, I was dragged out of my house and moved to a different state in the middle of my senior year. And
oh my God. I mean, I saw it and I was like, man, look, and here's the thing. When I was going through the therapy process, my therapist said behind every negative emotion, there's a secondary emotion. Behind every anger is hurt. It's hurt and sadness that is masked by the anger. Anger is just the way it gets processed or coped with, right? And so as I started to see it unfold in the book, and you were super vulnerable, super raw in this book. Quick break to thank Meet Gabby, the voice AI that answers your phone, screen leads, and books consults 24/7. They'll even send out retainers if the person on the other end of the phone asks for a retainer. If intake is slowing you down, check out meetgabby.com. This episode is supported by TonaLaw, a modern law firm built on integrity and innovation. Learn how they're changing the game at TonaLaw.com. Attorney referrals accepted from across the country. You'll see what it's like when you send us a case. You'll have some happy clients. But you did a masterful job too. You described your father as crazy in his writing, right? And that was the word you used earlier in the podcast. And I will tell you that as somebody, listen, outward appearances, right? I'm successful. I have a nice life. I built a nice business. I meditate. I was just writing something down about meditating. I'm closing in on 10 years of meditation. If anybody saw what goes on between my ears and listen, I have writings everywhere in my office. Everywhere in my home office is notebooks.
Yeah.
Who the fuck is not crazy? Like, listen, if anybody reads my journals after, they're going to be like, man, was this guy out there? Nobody's got it together. What I loved about the way you did it was you showed all facets of Alan, right? And you really did him justice. And everybody's broken, man. Who's not broken? I don't know anybody
Yeah.
that's not broken, Steve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you have writings, because I did at one point after my second divorce, I was like living in this huge house. I was alone. I was living in this huge, like 5,000 square foot house. I was in a horse pasture and we'd had horses. I had all these like notes. And the one that stood out was, so my father, Richard, that's the father who adopted me, who I was raised with. I had on there, this is what I used to motivate me. It said, F you, Richard. That was like the yellow, like every morning I looked at that. And I don't know what that says about me. I really don't, man. Maybe a therapist listens to this and say, but that was like part of the motivation is I'm going to show this guy that, even though, and he was dead by then, and I had almost killed him myself. And, you know about that.
I was just going to say, I mean, when you talked about that fight, like that's a level of, intensity that I was kind of blown away. It was one of those pivotal scenes for me.
And it's real, like, that was what was great about the therapist too, because this is a hypothetical for somebody listening. Like, yes. I got in a fight with my father, stood up to him, and I had him by the neck and I was squeezing him. And the therapist said, if you hadn't been pulled off, would you have killed him? Now, I'm not a fighter. I've had, I'm normal, but I'm not a guy that looks for fights. But she asked me to think about that, because lions, they kill their prey by grabbing around the neck. You had this man around your neck and you hated him and you were squeezing. Would you have killed him if you hadn't been pulled off? And the reality is, I don't know if I would have, but I wouldn't regret it if I had, almost, like at a certain point, because I had so much anger and he was such a bully. And when people get that kind of hate, that kind of anger inside of you, of course, it's not healthy, but it is true. Like, where do you stop? Violence is.
It brings to mind, I talk a lot, and maybe it's just because I'm getting older, I talk a lot about the fragility of life, right? We are all one bad thing away, one bad decision, one bad action away from complete disaster at any given time, right? The car accident you wrote about. I mean, heartbreaking when you hear the whole story behind what happened, right? And I pictured myself as a father separated from my daughter, who's the light of my life. And I could be your father. I could have been Alan driving by. I would never not be able to see my kid. So when you talk about that scene where you had the fight, God forbid you had alcohol in your system, you could be in jail right now instead of talking about the book you wrote. And you could have, right? Because there's such a fine line in life. And, human emotions are so complex. And I think that's what I loved about it, was you captured deep, complex things in such a masterful way. Took it right up to the line. I was right there with you. As somebody who's done martial arts, listen, I put people to sleep on the mat before. I know what that looks like and what 30 seconds, 2 minutes more could do to somebody. Right? And you captured all of that. I just got goosebumps talking about it, because we really are all walking a razor's edge every day and you forget about it.
Oh no, absolutely. And I talked to the therapist too about the whole abandonment issue, and you were adopted. So someone abandoned you at some point, and how that feels. And I always said, I think it would have been easier for me if I had just been adopted and abandoned without ever knowing my parents than knowing my parents and having them give me up. It's a different type of trauma. I just say it's a different type of trauma. I talked about a book called Letters to My Birth Mother, because I was adopted. I was an infant, and it's just a different type of trauma, right? Because you grow up and you feel this hole, and you don't know why you feel this hole. You don't know how to fill that hole, and you've got the worst abandonment ever because you've never had that initial bonding at all. And so it's just a different type. And then you get adopted into a family, and it's kind of the luck of the draw, right? So there are no perfect families, Steve. There are no perfect families. It's just a different type of trauma, right? When it's your mother versus your father, or, and alcohol's involved or not involved. I tell people this because they don't understand, because they'll say, well, he's your stepbrother. And I'll be like, no, I was adopted into the family. We're brothers. And I feel as strongly as my brother as I would, whether he's blood or not, it's the same. Whether I love him or hate him, it's not distinguishable. In my house, that was a good thing, is we were all 7 kids, and we were bonded, and we were a unit, and we were a family. And it didn't matter whether or not we had the same biological parents or not, because we were together as a unit, and we loved and hated each other, and it had nothing to do with who was adopted and who wasn't. We were just together like that, because it's unique. I couldn't imagine what it was like growing up in like a loving family. It would be
well, look, I mean, I know they're out there, right? But to quote my therapist, support systems when they're lacking are problematic for kids coming up. They have to figure out different coping mechanisms, which is one of the reasons you mentioned. It's so funny, Steve. You mentioned those sitcoms, the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family. And I think that's why they were so popular. Think about it. We talk about a time, this incredible familial turmoil to begin with. Just in the country, it's pretty rampant with what I anecdotally chalk up to all of those factors, right, that we talked about earlier. And so I was obsessed with those shows. I watched them on repeat because it was giving me what I didn't have, which was that stabilizing force. Now, my father, closest person in the world to me. I had the issues and I still have them. My mother's still alive. She's older. She doesn't listen to the show. So I talk pretty openly about stuff. But, I talk very frequently about the fact that when you're missing that, you look for it anyway. You crave it so much as a child, right? Like you just need it.
Did you, being the adopted brother versus the biological brother, and did you feel like insecure? Did you feel like they treated you differently?
I did not. I was very close with my dad. Like probably from early junior high on, I bonded very close with my father. And my mother always kind of treated me like the prince, which drove a wedge with me and my brother, right? Because I was always around them. I spent a lot of time with the family and my brother didn't. And he put a lot of space. And it wasn't until my father passed away that my brother and I were even able to get close. And now we're very close. I never felt that because I was like, I'm just going to do what I need to do to get to where I want to be in my life, whatever that was going to look like. I think that the interesting thing about us and people like us is, you make that intentional decision. You're not going to do what you grew up, right? You'll repeat a lot of the shitty habits and a lot of the bad things up to a certain point. I had an early divorce. Alcohol was a key part of my life. My daughter was 6 months old and I was like, I'm done. Never had a drink again because I was like, I'm not doing this. I am not going to let this kid see me with alcohol. So I made a promise to myself. Did you do something like that when your kid was born, your first child, or any of your kids where you said, all right, change has got to be made?
For me, at that time, focus on building a practice, being a lawyer. I think I was focused on success. I didn't have any substance abuse issues or any of those things. It was just more about taking, having the son, being close, knowing that I had to do everything I could to protect my family and just, developing relationships. So there wasn't a specific thing, but I made tons of mistakes. My wife now, my third wife, she was awesome. She's the first woman I ever dated. And this is in the book, but she was the first girl I ever dated. I was 21. I fooled around with plenty of girls, but I never had a relationship because I wasn't really capable, I don't think. So I met her, we were together, and then years later, and we went our separate ways, and I knew her family, and she knew my family. She'd come to our house, and when I reconnected with her 35 years later, I'd been married twice. She never got married, and she was in Miami, and incredible person. I went down to see her, and I started saying, well, they're not that I was adopted. I started telling the story and she was like, what? I go, well, yeah, I was adopted. Richard was my real father. She's like, what are you talking about? And so I started telling her these things and she started crying. And I go, why are you crying? She goes, I was with you for all those years. You never told me any of that. You never told me about a car accident. You never told me that you had a biological father or these other brothers and sisters or that you lived in Israel. You didn't tell me any of those things. There's so much stuff hidden inside of you. And I knew that. And I was like, man, what were we doing other than, having a good time at 21? Right. But
I think it's easier to close off. It's easier to close off when you, what I see now, and especially on the other side of therapy, I found that I kept moving up to the line, right? There's that line in therapy, you got to get across that threshold. And so I would go up to that line and be like, I'm good, I'd stop. I'm good, I'd stop for years, right? And I will never forget the first statement to my therapist. I meet the guy for the first time. I'm in college. And first thing I say to him, listen, I was adopted, but that had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, we can skip over that.
Right, we can skip all that shit in between. And then 20 years later, still towing up to the line with that same guy right before he retires. I said, listen, I'm here till you discharge me. I'm going through the process. I'm going to finish this time. Because I knew, and similar to you, I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, right? We disconnected for like 20 something years and we reconnected, but I had made the conscious decision that I think, one of the big takeaways for me from your book was you have to heal yourself in order to stop the generational trauma from happening.
Self-help, man. It's help yourself. Those books, I was in Israel and I talked about that. Those self-help books where you realize I woke up and I looked around and realized no one's going to do this for me. I'm not, I have got to do it myself.
Yeah.
And I know you have a lot of lawyers that listen to the show and all that, Tom, and I listened to some of your stuff, over the week because I knew I was coming in here. And of course, I loved a lot of the stuff you talked about. And my wife, she probably won't like this, but her father worked with Tony Robbins, traveled the world with him for 15 years, was like his top gun. He is a naturopathic chiropractor and they're very close. So my wife became a Tony Robbins person, whatever. And Tony's great, fantastic, nothing but respect. I went to a date with destiny. It's called, like 5 days. I had no idea what I was getting into. No idea. Absolutely no idea. The whole thing is crazy, but it was fantastic. But it was just crazy. And I thought, all right, I'm participating, I don't know anybody, so I'm sharing. And one day, one of the people came up to me, there's like 2,500 people. And we're in this group and she said, you have one of the most interesting stories here. So Tony would like to talk with you about it. And I'm like, I'm not talking to Tony Robbins about that. And she's like in front of people? And she's like, yes, because he brings people up and then he has to tell the story. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. I can't do that. I can't be vulnerable. I couldn't be vulnerable. That's it. I couldn't be vulnerable. And so then in our group, this guy comes up to me and you do all these exercises over 5 days. And this is important, man. This is important for you and for Bill, for everybody, like the being vulnerable thing. So I thought I was being vulnerable. We're doing these exercises. I'm like, okay, man, I'm sharing. And this guy comes up to me and he's from Britain. And it turns out he's like the psychiatrist for like the king or something in London. He's like the most famous psychiatrist in London. But at the Robbins events, you don't know who you're next to. You could be from anywhere. And he said, I've been watching you and you haven't shared anything this entire time. He goes, everything you're saying. I go, really? He goes, yeah, I've been watching you and you're not sharing the way you need to share. And you're not being vulnerable the way you need to be vulnerable. And so I guess my message with that is, and part of the book is, it's okay to be vulnerable. Be around people that you can be vulnerable with, be with your friends will allow you to be vulnerable and you be vulnerable with them. That helps you. I know you, Tom, and I could go in a room and sit and talk about incredible things for the next 3 hours, have relationships too, that you can open up to people that are there for you and have your back and whatever it is. Because we all have that stuff inside us, man. It's inside.
For sure.
Because people are like, how could you not go up and be with Tony in front of Tony and do all that? Like, there is no way in the world. And it was after that I decided, okay, I'm going to write my book.
Yeah. And again, in all fairness to you, I don't know that I would have felt comfortable in front of an audience of Tony Robbins people to do that. But I do love the way you did it in the book because you did it on your terms. I'm sure there's other stuff that's not in the book, but you were raw, real, but it's a different type of connection to your father who was a writer, right? So you built all of these connections for yourself through doing it. And I'm sure the book is gaining traction by the day. I know you just recently published it. You mentioned you have an agent. Are there plans for mass publication that they're looking at? Or, what are the agents looking at?
No, I had an agent, then COVID hit her. And so I wound up with a small publisher. They are fantastic. They're called Christmas Lake. I can't even tell you how they spent so many hours with me because, I'd written the book, but it was 400 pages. And these people, it's Christmas Lake Creative, and they're both from Yale, and they spent so many hours with me. I wasn't paying them. It wasn't, these small publishers, you get some percentage or whatever, but they spent so many hours, put their hearts and soul into it because they really felt strongly about my story, plus they related to it. And it came out for Father's Day, and I'm trying to gain traction, get on podcasts. I want to break through that. I want the bookstores to allow my small book into their stores because it will help people. The New York Times isn't going to review my book until somebody, reads and says, holy shit, you know what? This freaking lawyer from Orlando wrote a pretty decent book, and I think it'll help people because I think it's true.
For sure. Listen, I do have a lot of lawyers that listen to this. And for me, one of the things I'm noticing in the industry is I do a lot of conferences on the heels of the podcast and on the heels of LinkedIn is there's a lot of lawyers that need to read this book because so many of them are just so full of shit. And it's easy to see when you come from the places that we've come from, the therapeutic paradigm shift and significant trauma. And you go, oh my God, I just want to hug that person. It's so full of shit. They think all this other stuff matters. And, and like none of it matters, man.
Oh, when I was, I started out as a defense lawyer and I was, representing insurance companies and I had a lot of anger inside of me. So I was a really good defense lawyer because I could be a real a-hole. I knew how to do that and I liked to win and all that. And I realized I don't want to spend my life screwing people, but I was one of those lawyers and I still am. And there's so few of us out there. I'm transparent. You want to come look at my file? I'll tell a defense lawyer, you want to come look at my file? You can look at every single page. There's nothing in there I won't show you. I don't play those games. And I was like that as a defense lawyer. And I learned that from some older plaintiffs lawyers that I had cases against. They'd be like, you want to see my file, Steve? I'll show you anything you want to see. And there's not enough of that now. Now it's all this game playing and shell games. I know. You can't get anything in discovery. And come on, man, or talk on the phone. You get it, in Florida, almost everything's virtual. And so you don't get to know the lawyers because I'm a relationship guy. And I want to be able to call up the defense lawyer and say, look, cut through the crap. Can you just tell me where you're at? I'm not going to rat you out. You can trust. I'll do the same for you. And I think a lot of that comes from the way I was raised.
Absolutely. I was going to say it's about the golden rule, man. And it came from your book. I wrote down so many quotes, but one of the quotes I took was, it's not about what you do, but who you are that counts, right? And I love that. I love that because, I've been doing this north of 30 years. You've been doing it for as long and longer than I have. And at the end of this, none of this matters. It's how you made people feel, the people that you employ, the clients, right? For us, and maybe that's why a lot of personal injury lawyers get into personal injury to begin with, is you're providing rescue and support for people that need it, but it's also a form of self-rescue. You're helping others, and in helping others, you help you, right?
Yeah.
There's a high-level trial guy that was on this podcast, and he made the most poignant statement to me. This is a guy who's taken $100 million verdicts like they're easy, right? He makes them look easy, and his name is John Hustall. You know John from Florida, I'm sure, in Fort Lauderdale.
Sure.
And I said, John, you've accomplished the pinnacle of all of this. What keeps you getting up every day to do this? Like, what's the chip on your shoulder? And he paused and he was real quiet. And he just said, trauma. And he left it at that. And I knew not to ask further. But there's a common thread. And again, I'm 57. I don't need to be grinding the way I'm grinding right now. I'm sure you don't either. But yet here we are every day, So listen, I wanted permission to end the podcast. If you say yes, if you say no, I won't do it. There was a letter that was in the book from Alan to you, dated September 1979. It really struck me. Are you good if I read that letter as the close to this?
Sure. No, I would. Okay. I would do it, man. I'd be honored.
All right. So this is the letter from your dad. It says, "Dear Steve, my son, my brain cells have been tossed around and around. They haven't recovered. I cry tears of happiness. I want to be able to tell you that I love you. I was there. I was always there. You just didn't see me. Someday you will have to tell me what you expected, what you must have thought. I can't remember you calling me dad. Of course, I don't care what you call me. Parentheses, I really do, but it's how you think of me that matters. And I hope now you'll think of me often. I could not express my feelings when we did meet. I don't know if I will send this letter, but I will keep a copy and send it to Fayer, your uncle. One day you will read it. I have known for a long time that fathers and mothers take things for granted, and kids and parents go their separate ways. But when one is deprived of the other, suffers a great loss, and then finds it again, it felt wonderful to be able to see you. It feels wonderful to be able to write missing you. It's confusing to miss you when I never stopped missing you. Tell me how you feel. Love, D." For Dad.
Thanks.
I mean, man, I was so touched. Even now, I'm getting choked up reading it, right?
Never stop missing you.
And I just think it brought it full circle because the story you had in your head, I mean, that's why that letter shook me so much, because I had been feeling what you were feeling, right there angry with you. And then I read that letter and it was like a release, right? So masterful storytelling, Steve. I mean, this is a gift. I think that anybody who practices family law should be giving this out to their clients, giving it out to the clients so they see, like, by no coincidence, and it's not my story to tell, but my wife comes from divorce. And I'm giving her a copy of this book. And I'm going to tell her to read it because it still haunts her family generationally. Still. And you're talking about 40 years later. 40 years later. So
I told you earlier about this story, the guy from North Carolina, and they've invited me to come up to Chapel Hill and speak to a group of family lawyers up there about my experiences and what I went through in the book. And, I hope other people will do that because, listen, I did this because I want to help people, and I don't want kids to have to go through what I went through or what you went through or your wife went through or all the people that are listening have gone through. I mean, there are choices you can make, and you don't have to make your kids collateral damage. And, love is it's important to tell your kids you love them, and it's important for you to allow them to love you. And I need to be better at hugs, but I'm working on it. But no, man, Tom, it's been an honor, man. I've really enjoyed this, really have, and appreciate you reading and supporting it.
Oh my God, listen, I just want to say thank you for putting it out there. And I'm going to sum it up with this outgoing message. And I wrote it earlier and I just wanted to read it to you. There are stories that we tell to survive. There are stories that we tell to heal. And sometimes there's stories that we are not meant to tell, but someone needs to hear them anyway. Your book, Pretend They're Dead, is one of those rare books that transforms personal history into a collective truth. It's out on Amazon. If the conversation moved you, please share this conversation, get the book. And, it's having the bravery to tell this story, Steve. It's going to do exactly what you asked, which is help a lot of people. Help a lot. I'm going to buy a few copies of it now. There's people that I just think that I know they've been living with this 40 years of stuff up here, and I think the book will help them. So I just thank you for putting it out, man.
No, man, thanks a lot. And if anybody wants to just talk, call me and talk. It's, if I can offer any assistance or help or guidance or tell you how to handle or not handle a divorce as the person going through the divorce, it's been a great blessing to write this and been great and I really appreciate that, Tom. I really, really do, man. It means a lot.
Absolutely. I'm going to order a bunch of copies now, but there's the website that you have that has everything about the book and your law firm and everything else. Sure. Give them the website domain and I'll make sure it goes into the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's www.stevenscotteichenblatt.com.
Awesome. So listen again, thanks again for coming on. It was a tremendous gift to the world that you put this book out. I really do feel that way.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lead Counsel Podcast. Your host, Tom Tona. Go anywhere podcasts are distributed. Follow us. Leave us a 10-star review. Share some episodes with your friends. And thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you. This episode is sponsored by TonaLaw. They're not just another law firm. They're defining what it means to fight for their clients. We get a lot of attorney referrals from across the country. We pay fee participation in all jurisdictions where it's permitted. We focus on integrity, innovation, and relentless advocacy. TonaLaw is proving that the business of law can scale without losing its heart. If you want to see how a modern firm is built for impact and happy client referrals, check out TonaLaw.com. Mention again the Lead Counsel Podcast, and I'm happy to get on the phone with you. This episode is also brought to you by Meet Gabby, the voice AI built for law firms. Gabby answers your phones 24/7, qualifies leads, and books consultations so you never miss another client. Imagine cutting intake time in half while giving every caller a 5-star experience. That's the power of Meet Gabby. Learn more at meetgabby.com. Mention the Lead Counsel Podcast. You can also hit me up, and I'm glad to make an introduction to the owner.